My guest today is Magatte Wade. Magatte is an entrepreneur and author known for her dynamic approach to business and her dedication to fostering economic development in Africa. Born in Senegal, Magatte is the founder and CEO of Skin is Skin, a skincare company providing high quality, ethically sourced products. Magatte's entrepreneurial journey began with Adina World Beat Beverages, a company she founded in 2004 that produced drinks inspired by traditional African recipes and emphasized fair trade principles. She is the author of the new book, The Heart of a Cheetah: How We Have Been Lied to About African Poverty and What That Means for Human Flourishing. Magatte Wade, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Carrie. A pleasure to be here with you.
It's so great to have you here. I vividly remember meeting you several years ago at a conference hosted by the Foundation for Economic Education, where I'm a senior fellow. And you were talking about your work founding Skin is Skin, your motivation for being an entrepreneur, and highlighting the richness of Africa and the African people. And I remember in that presentation that you gave, something really stood out for me. You said that the question is not why is Africa poor, but why are other countries rich? And you began to talk about the conditions that create economic freedom and flourishing and entrepreneurship. And that just really stuck with me. And of course, is a central theme of your new book, The Heart of a Cheetah. I wonder if you could explain to us a little bit about what you mean by the sort of flipping the question around, instead of looking at why is Africa poor, why are other countries rich? What is that kind of central point?
Thank you. No, for me, why should the question not be why is Africa poor, but rather why are other nations rich? It goes back to even the individual. We all know that poverty is the natural state of man, man as in humanity. So that's the baseline, right? Anything different from that is what we should ask about. Oh, how did they get to a different result than the default line? So why is a nation poor is not what we should be asking, but rather how do nations become prosperous? And so basically, and that question popped in my mind. You know how sometimes kids can be just so logical, and I think that's really, a light of logic that struck me. So I was born in Senegal, west coast of Africa. At around age 2, my family migrated to Europe for economic reasons, meaning having to leave their home behind, their family behind, their child behind, everything that they know really behind in search of a better life, thousands and thousands of miles away from this place, because this place is still in a state of poverty. And so after a few years of their migration journey, after it was clear that okay, this is stable, this works, we're gonna be fine, then they called for me to be reunited with them. And I was around age 7, and eventually I'm now myself being uprooted from my community, my family, my grandma, who is my caretaker, having to move over to Europe to be reunited with my parents. That was a great thing, but also I'm leaving grandma behind. That was not a good thing. In any case, and when I arrived in Germany, I just looked around and I remember this feeling of how come they have this and we don't? And back then, all I was talking about really, for me, the most striking thing was that shower moment when mom is like, jump in the shower. I'm like, where's the bucket of hot water? And because, back home, it takes 45 minutes or an hour between the moment grandma said, my God, it's time for your shower, and the water can actually touch my skin. Why? Because she has to heat a coal stove, literally, like, the one you take at camping, you stuff the coal in the stove and then you lit it and then it catches on. Then you put a pot of water on it, wait for it to boil. Then you transfer that into a bigger bucket, mix some cold water, so, safer temperature for my skin. And then somebody stronger than grandma drags this big bucket to the shower area. And there at last, some 45 minutes to an hour later, I can finally take my shower with another littler, small plastic cup, cupping the water from the big bucket back and forth on my body. That's what taking a shower meant. And here mom is like, time for your shower. I'm like, where's the bucket of water? And she's like, come on, you silly, just jump in the shower. And there you jump in, you turn the knobs, the water is coming down, the pressure you want, the temperature you want. I'm like, whoa. And it was just like, what is going on here? And And that was really that. It was really, how come they have this and we don't? And it was about also the paved roads. Back home, there's mostly non-paved roads. So my feet are always ashy when I get home. I have to, rinse them first. So just this easiness of life, the grocery stores piled with all types of goods and, AC in the summer, heat in the winter. I was like, wow. And so and I just needed to understand. It was just so striking. At all I could remember. It's funny because I had never taken a plane ride in my life before. But but I don't remember that plane ride. But what I
Mm.
remember is the way I felt when I arrived in that place and what I saw and how it differed from what I left behind back home. In any case, the question needed to be answered because I became obsessed with it. It needed to be answered, and it became pretty much the defining question of my life. I had to know, and with time, it became from how come they have this and we don't. The question became how come some countries like mine and most African nations are poor, while other nations like the U.S., Canada, New Zealand, Australia are rich. What's going on here? And along the journey, I've heard so many different people bring up so many different reasons as to why that was the case, starting with the IQ fury. We're just not as smart. Us black and browns are just not as smart as white people. So it makes sense. It's not our fault. Others, oh, the malnutrition factor. Others, oh, you guys are just, always involved in war. You're lazy. Oh, colonialism, neo-colonialism, racism, we're stealing your natural resources. And it's very funny, Carrie, because it's very interesting to me because I think the world, Africans and non-Africans, the world are asking themselves, why is Africa still poor? I think this is a question that everybody has. Africans, non-African, everybody's just like, what is going on? And yet, if you line all types of people, you can put 100 people here, and I put them in two groups. 100 people here that are usually, if they're, Africans and their allies, and then you line up another 100 Africans over there, these are going to be, people who don't really care, probably, or whatever. And then you ask them that question. Everybody's going to have something to say to you, by the way. No one is going to say, I don't know. Everybody's going to have an idea. And on the camp of Africans and their allies, the usual suspects in terms of the answer to that question, why is Africa poor? Usual suspects fall into different categories, but always the same categories: racism, colonialism, or neocolonialism, where because the West is stealing your natural resources, because the West doesn't want you to get anywhere. But there's this big conspiracy on the West part that you stay down, so they stay up and they keep stealing from you. You hear it all. On the other side, them it's going to be your IQ is too low, you're too lazy, you're violent, you're always causing war, you're always at war with each other, things like that. And then both sides, so those would be their usual suspects. And both sides, where the usual suspects they share in common is corruption and you have rotten leaders. That's it. And I'm looking around at both sides and I'm looking at what they're saying, and none of that crap makes sense because to me, I'm thinking to myself, okay, let's say even colonialism or if it was due to colonialism, how come nations like Ethiopia that has never been colonized is still poor? I mean, Ethiopia for the longest time was the poster child of when you talk about poverty in Africa, many people are thinking Ethiopians. Many people are thinking Ethiopian people in their heads. Like those very raggedy looking people that only had the bones on their skin. They were the poster child of poverty in Africa. They've never been colonized. So please explain that to me. And conversely, you have other places that have been colonized. Like I would take a place like Vietnam, colonized, bombed, secondly bombed. I mean, it's like, when are these guys going to catch a break? And look at Vietnam today, where they are. So I look around the world and it's just like, this whole thing does not add up. The IQ of a lazy fury. Okay, how come then the same people who, the minute they leave my country, they go to another place, all of a sudden they can self-actualize, thank you very much. And some of them are entrepreneurs, very successful entrepreneurs, thank you very much. So really, is it really about that person? Or is there something else going on here? And then I'm thinking and I'm looking, and what you realize is at the end of the day, the only variable in this equation is the place where these people happen to be able to live their lives or not. So then I'm starting to think, what is going on with this place? What's going on there? And long story short, because I know we only have half an hour, but just walking people through what happened. So I was in, in Germany. I saw all of these things. I'm asking this question to myself. I'm trying to answer this question. Life happens in the meantime. We moved from Germany to France, and then after business school in France, I decided to move to the US. US doing very well for myself as a headhunter in the finance industry, finding talent for people, companies like Google and Netflix, when those companies were like tiny little offices in the middle of nowhere. And just looking around and, still trying to get to the answer to my question, doing extremely well for myself. And eventually one day I had an existential crisis moment in my life, because it was one of those days where, when you come from where I come from, having accomplished what I was able to accomplish, even back then, it's just, you look back and you're like, wow, God, I've come a long way. And thank you so much for the journey, and feeling such a sense of gratitude for all the people who have come through the journey to help you. Because I really believe that's how God exercises his grace. It's through the hands of other people, right? You'll never see God in front of you, but I believe that you helping me or somebody else showing up for me, that's how the grace of God is showing, through. And so anyway, having just so much gratitude for all of that. But every time I would feel this way, I would also feel right away a tremendous sense of despair and depression and grief and anger. And all of that had to do with the fact that, yeah, here I am enjoying this wonderful life. But yes, I worked really hard but I certainly was not working harder than the people left back home. Yet back home, people are still putting themselves into little fisherman's boat, trying to get to Europe in search of a job and drowning at sea. People back home are still falling off of airplanes because they thought it would be a good idea to hide in the landing gear of a plane on their way to immigration. People back home are still dying in the cargo sections of planes, frozen to death once the plane gets up high up there. People from back home are still being sold as slaves today in Libya, when they take land routes trying to get to Europe to find a job, and they get stuck in Libya and they get sold as slaves. In 2024, I cost between $300 and $500. So how, if you're a normally constituted person, can you know of things like that and yet be just like, oh, I'm just so glad I escaped all of that, and I'm just going to focus on my life? I don't know if somebody else can, but I certainly know that I couldn't. And for the longest time, the way I coped with that, the discrepancy between the life of abundance that I was afforded in a country like the US compared to the life of scarcity that I had left back home, I would always try to, when that feeling descended upon me, I would shrug it under the rug and just say to myself, my God, come on. I mean, I was like barely 21, and be like, what can you do about this? This thing was here before you were born, and it's probably going to be here long after you're gone. This is bigger than you. This is things that you do not control. Actually, very few people control. And that's how I would find peace with it. I wouldn't say I don't care, but I would be like, what do you want me to do? Where do I start? What am I supposed to do? What? Because it seems so big. And so for the longest time, I was able to just push it under the rug. But that day, it was not letting go. It was just not letting go. It was just like, nope, you're going to deal with this. And the pain was so great that I think my body just gave in, and I jerked around, and I could have been dead by now. But eventually I stopped the car and I made a deal with God. And I said, God, from here on, I just want you to know that I will show up every single day that you give me, breath. But I want for that breath and that energy that you put through me to go towards the bettering of my beloved continent. I don't know what to do, but I'm showing up. I can promise you that. And eventually things started to happen. I became an entrepreneur shortly, not because, oh, I want to make so much money, but yeah, I was very upset that the drink I grew up with, which is a part of my cultural identity, was disappearing because, um, when you're in Africa, so many of us have this complex of inferiority, whether we recognize it or not. And so it means that whatever is indigenous to us is probably not good enough. And so everybody is, striving to, get access to Western brands, in this case, Western soda pop brands. So the top of a pyramid is busy buying Western soda pop brands like Fanta, Pepsi, Coca-Cola. And the bottom of the pyramid, which is the largest part of the population, they're busy buying knockout of those brands, right? Meanwhile, our indigenous drink which is also part of our cultural identity, is being squeezed out. Because the hibiscus is known as the juice of Teranga. Teranga means hospitality. That is what us, the people of Senegal, are known for. We might not have much, but you will always be welcome in our homes. You always have the best place to lay your tired body on. You always have the best piece of meat we can have. It's just that, and you leave our place and you think we're the richest people in the world just because we put in front of you the best we had. And so that's us. And this juice personified. So you understand why it's so important for me. I grew up with it as a child. It's my pride, right? And to see it being squeezed out because of that. And at the same time, the juice is losing ground. The women who used to grow the main ingredient for making it are also losing their livelihood. Because if you don't drink that anymore, what do we need this for? And anyway, so one thing leading to another, I mean, that just really got me so upset. And but where I come from, upset goes with creation. So you criticize by creating. Something makes you upset, which means you're criticizing it, but you can't stay there. You have to criticize by creating. That's a mantra that I grew up with. And in any case, so that meant just bringing back the juice. So in my case, it was built a brand that would have its DNA embedded its DNA would be embedded in the very best of my traditional Senegalese culture. And in doing so, we would bring back women. We would bring these women. We would bring jobs back to these women. And that's exactly what we did. And so, but as I was doing that, Carrie, we had so there was a sister company in the US and a sister company in Senegal, one in charge of R&D, in charge of sales and distribution and all that stuff, the other one in charge of more or less the whole supply chain, as well as just the whole supply chain. So, and in founding these two companies, sister companies, I started to see something really weird, and the best way I could describe it was just basically in the ease of doing business. Over here, it would take almost a couple of years back in the days to legally register a business. Over there, it would take, couple of, I mean, we're talking about less than an hour probably to do it online. So anyway, and here labor laws are so complicated. So the whole thing just felt like starting and running a business. It felt like swimming through molasses back home. And in the US, it felt just so, I mean, running a business is never easy, but I'm talking here about barriers that are almost artificial because they don't have to be there. So the US, so the contrast was so big. And at first my reaction was like, oh, well, it's normal. It's because we're poor, but everything is so hard. And them, it's because they're rich, that's why it's so easy to do a business. Just come to think of, wait a second, but you're poor because you don't have enough money. You don't at least not enough money to take care of your basic needs. You don't have money because you don't have a source of income. What is a source of income for most of us? It's a job, isn't it? Where do jobs come from? The private sector, enterprises, companies. Oh, but what do they need? What do they need? Oh, they need an enabling business environment. Oh, but wait, you just told me right there that it is so hard to start and run a business over here. And there I had it. It was all upside down. Yes, Africa is the poorest region in the world because it happens to be the most overregulated region in the world. That's a region in the world where nations provide the least economic freedom to their wealth creators, because poverty is solved by prosperity. Prosperity is built by entrepreneurs. What do entrepreneurs need? An enabling business environment. Yet here you are telling me that what I notice in my country is not an anecdote. Because when you look at all of these business economic indexes around the world, looking at how easy or hard it is to start and run a business anywhere in the world, systematically, what they show you is that all of Scandinavia is more capitalist than almost any sub-Saharan African nation. And I was just like, wow, there it is. There was the answer to the question that little 7-year-old Magatte has been asking her whole life. And this answer made sense. Yet, remember my two groups? Remember the world that's obsessed with why is Africa poor? And yet when you ask them, everybody has something to say. I have not heard that from anyone. Then you wonder why we are still poor. Because if you don't have the right diagnosis, you cannot get to a right solution. You might be lucky, but we all know we should not count on luck. And so there we had it. And I was just like, wow. So the book, The Heart of a Cheetah, is all about that. It's just like really how we've been lied to about African poverty, because right now I think the whole world has settled on the common usual suspect as to why we're still poor. But most importantly, what the answer, the proper answer to that, what does it mean for human flourishing? Because we're not aliens, we're not weirdo people. You know, what works for man, as in humanity. And so I think, so this book is all about walking people through this journey, this intellectual journey that I had to walk through myself, and having to discover on my own why Africa is still poor, or more should say, why other nations are rich. Understanding how we got there. We don't have time today to do that, but going back into the history, how to understand this critical time in history where we made a pact with the wrong people. We made pact with the Marxist socialists of back in the days when African nations were getting their independences for the most part. It was also at a time when Marxist socialism, those ideologies were en vogue. No respectable intellectual was non-socialist. They all were socialist. It was, we had drunken the Kool-Aid. It was whatever, despite the lies coming out of the Soviet Union, and it was also at a time when we were just barely coming out of, the colonialism and moving into this phase called the independences, at a time when it is true that it has been the Marxist socialists who traditionally have been more, fighting for race equality. Right. Although Marx was a known racist, the Marxist socialists, for the most part, have been the one fighting for racial equality in times when obviously there was no racial equality. So you could understand that then our people, our African liberators, who were negotiating, we were walking towards our independences, between those very strong feelings of, you guys have been our allies in racial equality, fighting for racial equality. At the same time, there is this battle of ideologies going on between the West and the Eastern Bloc, one defending freedom and practicing capitalism as its economic system, the other one is various forms of statism. We are going to side with the side that did not colonize us. And in this case, it was the other side. So this is how, at a very critical time of our history, which is independences, we took the wrong fork at the turn, and we espoused Marxist socialist ideologies. As you and I know, you never will have anything to show for when it comes to economic prosperity if you follow down that path. But we followed that path, and we have never questioned it. Never. We have never revisited that heritage of colonialism. So if you want to tell me that we're poor today because of colonialism, the only colonialism that I'm willing to accept that keeps us poor today is the Marxist socialist ideology that, yes, we inherited from colonialism and people that have nothing to do with us. That I'm willing to take. But anyway, so that's what happened. And so the book goes also into that. And most importantly, the book also walks us towards how do we get out of this? Because the truth is, the solution to this is not rocket science. It's not. Multiple nations have done this: Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, even China. China is nothing else than recognizing that these stupid Marxist socialist ideologies do not work if you want to become economically prosperous. And China also understanding, they can remain communist all they want in their social ways or whatever, but when it comes to economics, you're going to have to do something different. And there they created these SEZs, special economic zones, that are among the most free market zones in the world, because they too understood only the free markets will get us there. So they created these little zones. In China, it's a zone. Singapore, it's at a nation state level, right? So if you're small, you can do it all at a nation state level at once. If you're a big country, you do zones like they did. But whether you're talking about a nation, but this has been proven everywhere. You look at places like, South Korea, North Korea, same people technically, same background. You can't even say, oh, but one decided to run on a very specific software, the other one didn't, and then look at the outcome. Same thing with West Berlin, as well as East Germany, West Germany, East Germany, same thing, same people, blah, blah, blah. They decide to run on different softwares. We know the software that wins. countries that are very different from one another, nothing in common or whatever, but they run on the same software, they get the same outcome. So come on, come on. The battle of these ideas, I mean, it's been settled so many times throughout times all over the place, and it is resisting as heck. So yes, free market capitalism is the way forward. And that's what we are going to have to do in our African nations. And what I propose there is we do it through startup cities, which are next generation special economic zones with their own law, their own governance, as well as regulatory custom regulatory framework. All we're doing here is in a nation where maybe you might be 140 or 142 on the doing business index ranking, which is terrible. And a lot of African nations are around those places. Most of us are in the bottom half of the doing business index ranking. Saying in nations like that, it's going to be almost impossible to try to reform everything at a nation state level because it's very complicated. Instead, let us work it zone by zone. You have thousands of special economic zones all over the continent, yet we are still where we are. Some of them are doing better than others, but none of them is doing as well as they could. Why? Because even the best among them is still running on 80s software, because this is a software and it needs to be updated. And we just haven't. We're stuck in the 80s software. We discovered the software, but instead of getting the 21st century version, we're still stuck on the 80s version. And so these startup cities are our way of just leapfrogging over the whole thing, and we do it city by city. And this is what I call the promise of startup cities. And this is the reason why I'm so bullish on a bright future for Africa. I am speaking now to 9 countries. There is real excitement. There is real understanding of this. You have people like, and just to tell you why I'm excited, because it's one thing for me if I went to some of these nations and I was starting to talk to them about this and I'm just getting a big fat no or like whatever, let you go home. No, what you're getting is like you're talking to this Minister of Economy and Finance, and this person is telling you, my God, what's the difference between civil law and common law? So somebody else might laugh and be like, and you're a Minister of Economy and Finance? Me, I'm like, this is good actually, because it would make sense. If you don't know the difference between this and that, it makes sense then that you're not seeking the better one, right? But if you knew already between the two and you're still fighting me back and forth, then I have a bigger problem. But if you didn't know, then it explains the whole thing, right? Because, right? So anyway, so these are the type of reactions we're seeing. And we're also seeing people who are saying, I mean, this is great. And I think the approach with us is for so long, the conversation with some of these leaders, because people are like, oh yeah, you guys are stealing money, whatever. For me, and this is in a way why the Chinese have the CCP has gotten so far along in Africa, is because when the West was doing what the Africans deemed patronizing, because the West through the IMF and the World Bank is saying, hey, you guys are doing so poorly, we have to bail you out all the time. But all of our loans are coming with strings attached. And so pretty much with strings attached, they're telling them what to do. Where the Chinese are coming and saying, we don't care what you do. We're gonna give you the loan. These are the terms. If you can't pay back, we'll come back for your organs, ports, airports, whatever. But at least it's clear. Go do what you need to do. Of course, our leaders, many of them are going to take it and siphon most of it. And the Chinese also negotiate. And by the way, that road we just give you money to build. We just want to be the ones building it. So in a way, they get paid back. They get paid because when they build it, we pay them. We borrow the money from them to have them do a job, but we have to pay them for. So you pay them with that, plus they get the interest from the loan and all that. And if we can't pay again, they come for the organs. But the Chinese do not sit there and say, well, we think that you should have a rigor program where you have to diminish your state expenditures, or we think you should be investing more in your education. However good the idea is, but they don't tell them what to do. And so you see our people are more excited. They're like, oh, you mean we get the money, we get to do whatever we want to do with it. No questions asked. The only time we get in trouble is if we don't pay back. And why do I care when we don't pay back anyway? I'm not the one paying personally for it. They're just going to come for my organs, the organs of a country, ports, airports. And if I was a good leader, I would care, but clearly I'm not. So who cares? Nobody cares for me. And on top of that, they have this whole thing where nobody's patronizing us. So you see, that's where the Chinese, in a way, I think they did much better than the West, right? In their dealings with African leaders, for many of them. Us, what we're saying is, I know that at some point some people are going to criticize and be like, how can you be working with such and such leader? And I'm like, we have to be strategic and we have to be pragmatic. What we cannot do is be patronizing people, telling them what to do. And so my approach has been more, look, my plan is not to say, you're running on A is bad, you need to get to X. No, I'm not even going to take a look at A. But X is where we need to get to. So let us try a little pilot somewhere and see if we can build X for you. And then as you build X, then you give them a pathway for redemption. You give them a pathway for reform, for reformation, for reforming themselves, their country, and everything. So even the people in the country get to see, oh, X works better. And even you're going to see some of the oligarchs are going to start to realize, oh, you mean over there, I get to still do business, make a lot of money, actually make more money. Oh, and I'm doing it in a way where now I don't have to be answering to this president anymore. Because guess what? All of these guys who are benefiting from cronyism, none of them is free. None of them is free. You saw what happened to Jack Ma. You saw what happened to all of these Russian oligarchs. Yeah, they make a lot of money. People think, oh, yeah, whatever. But these people have no freedom. They can't say what they have to say. They can't do what they want to do. They always have to watch their backs. And most importantly, they're always at risk. Always. Because no one trusts anyone. These presidents never trust them. The more money they make and the more they are afraid of these businessmen, these crony businessmen. And so even them realize, oh, over there, I'm making my real money, my own money. It's not going to be contingent on if I'm kissing ass or not to the president or not. So eventually everything starts to move around. So we have to find a pragmatic path from where we are to where we need to go. And it cannot just be, we destroy everything because you rat and you corrupt, you whatever. No, we find a promising path because no one in their right mind, I don't care how bad they are, if you tell them, I'm coming for your head, but they're sitting there and waiting for you with your big long knife that's really that's ready to cut the head. No, they're going to take care of you before you arrive. So here you try to find a way to go from where we are to where we're going, leaving no one behind. And that's really, I think it's been for me one of the biggest realization I've seen. And when you approach it like that, you realize they don't really fight you. They're like, oh, okay, so you mean I can have my cake and eat it too? Yeah, that's what we're going to have to give them. And that's the path forward.
Just so powerful, Magatte. I think one of the most compelling messages of your book is the connection between economic freedom and personal freedom, as you say, which of course leads to human flourishing. And then this idea that humans are naturally creative and entrepreneurial, and that it's actually these external forces, typically government-induced regulations, or the lack of of conditions that enable entrepreneurship that prevent
Right.
that human creation, and that the solution is not to sort of try to make people more entrepreneurial because they already are. The solution is to make it easier for them to create, to build, and to really transform their own communities. And that's certainly what you are, the message that you're sending. I'd love to just sort of wrap up, Magatte, by hearing from you your sort of advice for people who want to be entrepreneurs. You yourself have launched companies and worked with others who've launched startups. And I'd love to hear your thoughts for people who are listening who are beginning to run their own businesses or thinking about launching their own companies. What would you say is sort of your top advice for someone who wants to be an entrepreneur?
I would say if you want to be an entrepreneur, first of all, you have to remind yourself. I think all of us have that ability in us. I think it's very important that you are very aware of what's ahead. And so for that,
Mm.
one of the advice that I've been giving people is get as many autobiographies of creators that you really value and read their biographies, because I think as you do it, it's going to do something to you. You might not understand what it's doing to you, but what it's doing to you is the only thing we know about entrepreneurship is you basically wake up every day solving problems. From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, you're solving problems. And I think it's very, but the problem is when you look around us, we've all been sold this myth of the overnight success story.
Mm.
And many people, I think, have no idea, especially first-time entrepreneurs, have no idea what to expect. and they face every day all of these difficulties, and they don't necessarily know, even if it's part of a journey, they start to doubt themselves. They even don't like that part of a journey. When I'm like, in fact, you must like that part of a journey because that's the only sure part of a journey you're going to have, whether you succeed in the end or not. For sure, every day you're going to wake up with problems to solve, problem that you're going to solve, making 2 steps forward, 5 backwards. And when that happens, you're just like, am I really suited for this? So I would say that personal endurance and, that need for being somebody who's perseverance. Perseverance is the name of the game. The only reason why some of us win and others lose is because some of us keep showing up no matter what, and no matter how hard we've been hit the day before and how many times we've been hit the day before, you just get yourself back on that saddle. And I think for me especially, at first I was raising my fist at God a lot at first, until I started spending time doing that. And it's Michael actually who got me into that habit of reading biographies of all types of people, whether it's the Wright brothers with, getting to get us today to the airplane. Do you imagine how many times these people tried to fly and how many times they fell? I'm shocked they didn't, break their necks earlier or whatever. But eventually that gave us these planes, this feast of engineering that we have today through planes. But they didn't we just wake up and it happened. So stories of Wright brothers, going back every day on the damn field and trying to fly this thing. Or, you hear Steve Jobs and all the crap that happened to him. You hear, and also, yeah, so I think it's important to have that mindset of persevering, as well as keep on showing up no matter what, and learning to actually like that because it's part of a journey, and taking pride in it, and realizing that every single time you get one of those cuts, it's what's going to get you to the next level. So there's many things I could say, but today I was more inspired to bring that advice up. Tomorrow you ask me if it's another one, but today that's the one I had in mind.
I love that.
Maybe because I'm going through it right now. So
Yes. I
yeah.
love that advice, Magatte. And you brought up Michael, your husband, Michael Strong, who's also an education entrepreneur who's been on this podcast several times, the founder of the Socratic Experience. Just such good advice to hear the stories of other successful entrepreneurs and what they've had to go through. And I would recommend to my listeners and viewers that they start with your book, The Heart of the Cheetah, because it's autobiographical in many ways, and yet so much more than that, really getting to the root of this question of why is Africa poor? Why are other countries rich? And how can we remove barriers to free markets and entrepreneurship to enable greater human flourishing and prosperity? So the book, again, The Heart of a Cheetah, Magatte Wade, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Carrie. It's been a joy. Appreciate it.